This is so close to being the perfect one-size-fits-all gaming laptop. The 2022 Asus Zephyrus G14 is an absolute work of art, a performant beast, and a stunning all-rounder. And yet, I'm not sure that I'd splash my own cash on one. Want to know why? Well, you best keep watching then. But first, a message from this video's sponsor, Lexar. Their Aries RGB RAM is a factory overclocked, stylish RGB kit that comes in both DDR4 and DDR5 options, plus this stunning white too. It offers impressive overclocked performance, with this kit boasting a 4000 megatransfer per second rating, plus sleek aluminium heat spreaders, and of course is topped with RGB lighting, which you can control with Lexar RGB Sync. It's even compatible with major motherboard brands' RGB platforms, so check it out at the link in the description below. Let me start with a rundown of all of the specs. This new 2022 model is an all AMD machine, rocking a new Ryzen 6900HS, which is an 8-core 16-thread chip, alongside 32GB of DDR5 4800 RAM. Yeah, DDR5. I was surprised to see that here, didn't know that, but it's there. You get 16GB of soldered RAM alongside a single, in theory upgradable, 16GB DDR5 SODIMM. You also get a 1TB Gen 4x4 SSD that looks awfully bare. In fact, so bare that I think it's missing a DRAM cache, meaning its maximum performance was just 3.6GB per second, down from the over 7GB per second that most DRAM-equipped Gen 4x4 SSDs offer, although this is still plenty fast enough, if a bit of a shame. Anyway, the final piece of the spec puzzle here is the GPU, a Radeon RX 6800S. Not to be confused with the 6800HS CPU that you can also fit this very machine with. God, AMD, please sort out your naming schemes. Interestingly, this does have a MUX switch to switch which GPU, which graphics card is connected to the display, either the iGPU or the DGPU, which does help increase performance and reduce latency. Anyway, that is an awful lot of power in a tiny 14-inch machine like this, but surprisingly, it holds its own rather well. Cinebench R23 single-threaded shows a decent improvement over the previous generation Ryzen 5000 series chips, although definitely a step behind the new Intel 12th gen options, including the 12900H and the equally skinny Flow Z13. Multi-threaded is much the same story. A healthy lead over a last gen Ryzen, especially comparing apples to apples in the same Zephyrus chassis, albeit the slightly larger G15 from last gen, and equally the 12th gen chips are, especially the sort of higher overall core count definitely helps, hold a decent advantage over the 6900HS in here. That trend holds true in Blender and the BMW scene. Still excellent performance here, although not quite as fast as, say, the 12700H, especially in the slightly thicker, slightly better cooled machines. Although in the Gooseberry scene, Ryzen, well, it just always shines here, with near chart-topping performance. That's in part thanks to the impressive power consumption, especially over that longer render. As for Premiere Pro, using Puget Bench, the G14 scored rather low here. This is the same trend that I've seen with other recent laptops that I've had, with the G14 being actually pretty close in score to the 12900H in the Flow Z13. The trend continues in After Effects, where again the score is relatively low, although it's on par with the other 12th gen machines that I've tested recently. Only in Photoshop do we get a literally chart-topping result. It's the highest score I've seen from a laptop, and by a convincing margin. Not bad. Lastly, I want to touch on power consumption. The 6900HS in here did an excellent job, running at just 42 watts during the Gooseberry render, with only a mildly higher peak of 50 watts. In its turbo mode, it does push out more like 55 watts at constant with a peak of, well, I registered 69 watts. Nice. Although in its performance mode, that is the second lowest result that I've had only behind the 12900H in the Flow Z13, although I should mention that that chip had a considerably higher peak power consumption at 88 watts. Of course, being a gaming laptop, you want to know how it fares in games too, and in short, the answer is fairly well, if not quite perfect. At the native 2560 by 1600 resolution, on generally medium settings, you can expect around 60 FPS in most games. That's not amazing considering this is a 120Hz display, although it's not too bad either. For the sake of comparison, at 1080p instead of 1200p, which is the native downsampled resolution, you can expect a lot better overall performance and a better overall spread. In CSGO, the G14 offers fairly midfield performance. Of course, we're talking about over 200 FPS, so it's perfectly fine, but it wasn't the absolute fastest machine that I've had in. In Microsoft Flight Simulator, that ran at around 71 FPS average, making it the second fastest machine I've had in. It does lag behind the Aorus 17 XE4 with its 12700H and RTX 3070 Ti, but that laptop is nearly twice as thick as the G14 and considerably larger in the other dimensions too, so if I'm honest, this is pretty reasonable performance and what I would expect. In Cyberpunk, the G14 runs second fastest again, and this time is remarkably close to that thick boy powerhouse laptop, which is not bad. And actually, it's the same story for Watch Dogs Legion, where again it offers just shy of 100 FPS average and only 7 FPS behind that Aorus 17. And finally, in Fortnite, it's back to the midfield performance again. It ran over 130 FPS average, so more than enough even for this display, but the thicker Aorus was pushing more like 170, which would be, well, nicer to get a little closer to perhaps. Still, plenty of power on tap for games, at least when running at 1080 or more like 1200p on this display. Now, I've mentioned the display enough to, well, have to talk about it, so let's do that. This is a 14-inch 2560 by 1600 panel, meaning it runs a 16 by 10 aspect ratio. That seems to be the new trend, although one that I think I've made clear, at least in previous reviews, that I'm not exactly on board with. It's definitely not my preference, although it is a rather good looking panel. It's a 120Hz IPS panel that, in my testing, covers 100% of the DCI-P3 spectrum, with a delta E of under 2 and around a 500 nit peak brightness, at least in SDR, which makes this a rather nice display for content consumption or creation. The downside comes in the response time department. Asus claims that this will run a 3 millisecond response time. And technically, maybe if you squint, you might read any of these numbers as no, who am I kidding? This ran around a 10 millisecond average with peak results as high as 17. It also runs an impressive amount of overshoot, especially for a laptop and especially on falling transitions. If you take a look at the raw data, it shows what I mean here. When you factor in the overshoot time and trim off 5 RGB values on either end, you're left with what is just a remarkably long transition. It's worth noting though, just how important it is to see reviewers test this though, because I'll let you in on a little secret. Asus didn't actually lie. Well, okay, not the barefaced, it's not a barefaced lie, it's more the subtle misdirection that everyone generally does. Here's that graph again, showing the perceived response time, as in the time it takes the panel to transition, including overshoots and trimming off those 5 RGB values on either end. That comes out to something like 15 milliseconds, but now here's that same graph, but with what I call the initial response time. The sort of, well, before the overshoot time, using the rather terrible 10% of light level tolerance, and oh look, 3 milliseconds. But saying the response time is done here is like saying you won the marathon because you did a timed 100-meter sprint halfway around the course and then just walked the rest. Those response times are confirmed with the UFO test as well. You can see that there are around 2 frames ghosted on screen at any given time, which at 120 Hz is 16.67 milliseconds, also known as 60Hz. You can also see the new frame never really gets fully rendered. The black pixel for the eyes isn't exactly present here, so in short, this feels a lot like a 60Hz panel that's just being overdriven to 120Hz, and just kinda not. Actually gaming on it though is a reasonable experience. This sure isn't your next esports machine, but for casually clicking heads in a battle royale or anything else you like, it's actually a nice enough, it's a decent time. Surprisingly, thanks to the vapor chamber design in the G14, it's remarkably quiet even while gaming. It's not silent for sure, but I was definitely impressed by how, well, relatively silent it was. And there's actually a second display on this machine, although it's on the back. Asus calls this the anime matrix display, which is a white LED sort of almost dot matrix style display that we've seen before on the G14 and G15 models previously. It's definitely a cool thing to look at, but much like any rear-facing lighting, it's likely to spend most of its life disabled, out in the real world, although you can't just buy a G14 without it now, so, or at least as far as I can tell, so you're going to be stuck with it, even if you're probably going to disable it most of the time. I/O-wise, you get 2 USB-C ports with DisplayPort Alt mode, 2 USB-A ports, HDMI, headphone jack, DC in, and a micro SD card reader. That's actually a really good setup for a laptop of this size, and save for maybe Ethernet, I'm not sure that you need a dongle for pretty much anything. The keyboard is excellent too. It's the right balance of tactile and firm without getting in the way. I had an incredibly easy time getting up to speed on it. I also really enjoyed using the massive trackpad as well. It has a great feel, it's definitely well sized, and has the right sort of tactile click when you, well, go to click. Really, everything besides the display makes me think that this is the perfect machine for me. It's small, thin and light, making it a great travel companion and reasonable battery life too. It's plenty powerful enough for on-the-go gaming or editing, and the actual usage experience is pretty fantastic. But that display, especially the slow response times and the aspect ratio, just don't do it for me. That might actually be a bit of a deal breaker, although if you aren't so fussed about those things, I think you might love this. With that said, those are my thoughts, but I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. What do you think of the G14? Is it a laptop you'd pick up yourself? Would you go for something maybe non-all AMD, maybe something slightly larger, slightly smaller, more portable, or just something that maybe doesn't have an anime matrix display on the back? Feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, if you want to check out the G14, I'll leave a global Amazon affiliate link to it in the description down below that you can check out. And if you want to support the channel, you can do so by just staying notified of the videos and watching them with the subscribe button and the notification bell. You can also support directly through YouTube with the YouTube join button right next to the subscribe button, or you can check out Patreon instead if you'd rather. There's also a whole load of other links in the description that you can check out, from merch hoodies or t-shirts like this one, or other affiliate links to places like Overclockers UK if you're buying from there. Feel free to check out some more videos on the end cards, maybe the Z13 review if you're interested. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, we'll see you on the next video.